He kōna I purangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Welcome to another episode of No Stupid Questions, the podcast where we try to get you answers to all your money questions. Thanks so much for all the emails we've had recently. A lot have been about NZ Super, particularly in relation to people either leaving the country and wondering about being able to get a pension, or moving to New Zealand and wondering about their entitlement. We're still pondering how we address all of them, so just know at the moment we're not ignoring you, and I know there is a lot of demand for information on that subject. I'm joined today, as ever, by Justin Gregory.
How you doing, everyone?
We have a good range of questions this week. To start, we have one from Rosemary on the comparison we often see between this country's economic fortunes and those of Australia.
Right. Rosemary says, we are seeing many reports of people going to Oz and getting paid, fingers in the air, twice the hourly rate in a low-skilled role than in a skilled role in New Zealand. And the cost of living is lower in Oz. When minimum or living wage discussions happen in New Zealand, employers frequently point out that any increase in wages will just make goods cost more, i.e. they have to raise prices. So what magic is the Oz economy doing to pay twice the hourly rate to a dishwasher, but still sell a cup of coffee at a lower price than here in New Zealand?
To answer this, I talked to Mary-Jo Vergara, who's an economist at KiwiBank.
I think it's a really good question. I think it comes down to some structural things, and it's that Australia is much larger in terms of the economy and the population, so they've got more customers, and so they can kind of spread their costs across many more sales. They're also more productive, so there's more output per worker, so they can afford higher wages without that hurting prices. And then also they're more competitive, and when you're more competitive, you don't really have the ability to raise prices like that. You'll lose your customer base. So they are just more productive in those ways, so they can absorb higher costs, unlike here in New Zealand where it's much smaller scale, we're lower in terms of productivity. So when we see increases to wages, that has to be translated into higher prices.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Do you think, are we likely to see that change here? Could we improve our situation?
I think it really comes down to productivity for us, and being more productive in terms of our capital investment. A lot of our growth tends to be driven by labour. That's just the way things have been in New Zealand. There's this underinvestment in capital, in capital. So we've just been more reliant on labour. So it really requires a change in how we can kind of grow our economy, make that more into capital investment rather than just always focusing on labour.
So there's structural stuff involved here, and also questions about how we grow the economy.
Our next question here is from Sarah. She's got an interesting question about KiwiSaver. She says she's Muslim and has had her KiwiSaver suspended for years because she cannot take interest. She wants to know whether there are interest-free options for other people in the same position. Susan, what do you got?
I admit I only know a bit about this, and I'm really willing to be corrected. But I think the idea in Islam is that you can't use money to make money. There has to be something tangible behind the transaction. But that doesn't mean that just because you're Muslim, you have to invest with no return. The best option I know of for Sarah is a KiwiSaver and investment provider called Always Ethical. It used to be called Amana Ethical, but it invests according to Sharia law. It doesn't invest with companies that earn money from interest, like banks and mortgage companies. And Barry Coates, who's founder of Mindful Money, says he thinks its adherence to its principles is sound. So that could definitely be an option worth looking into.
Now, a question from River, who says, I encountered an issue when I received a reminder that my Mighty Ape subscription was due. The payment information for my visa details were expired on the website, and that was by nearly a year, and I didn't wish to continue the subscription. So I made the assumption that payment would be rejected as the expiry date had passed and the CVV was invalid. So, when I received an email confirming the renewal of the subscription, I was confused. The payment information was definitely outdated. So how was the payment processed? Mighty Ape refunded the transaction and suggested they had payment tokens. Perplexed, I questioned the bank around how did they make customers aware the expiry date displayed on the bank-issued card was meaningless, that Visa issued tokens to merchants so they could override customer payment information to whatever enabled payment. I'm interested to know what has changed with regards to Visa and banks gaining customer consent for tokens to be issued. Most people have no idea expiry information on cards has little protection. And that's from River.
Yeah, I had no idea about this either, so I went to Rivers Bank, which is ANZ, and its spokesperson told me that when someone signs up for a subscription, they agree to create a recurring payment authority, sometimes called a payment token. So that's that token that we were talking about. And this allows the merchant to charge a card on a recurring basis in line with a subscription agreement. And Visa offers a service to merchants called Visa Account Updater. So if the customer's card expires and is reissued, Visa can automatically update the customer's card details for any merchants who have valid recurring payment authority. So that means your subscription might continue even if the expiry date printed on your card has passed. The bank says it's important for customers to regularly check their bank statements so that they can cancel subscriptions they no longer want or may have forgotten about. And the expiry date on a credit card doesn't guarantee a subscription will be cancelled. To ensure it's cancelled, you need to cancel it directly with the merchant. And the CVV code, which River also mentioned, but which I think I took out of the script for brevity, is only used when you first save your card. So later subscription charges use the stored token, not the CVV. And they say that they have a card tracker on the ANZ Go Money app that you can use to see where your details might be stored around the place. And they say if you try to cancel and you don't have any luck, you might be able to get a charge back. I also spoke to Claire Matthews, who's a banking expert at Massey University, about this. She said she would expect that usually the expiry date should matter, but she said while she can understand the concern, for most people it's probably a benefit if the subscription continues because they don't have to keep, going around updating their card details every time they get a new card. And she says it's also got a fraud protection element that is quite handy. So the best thing to do is if you don't want something to continue, you should just try and cancel it with the merchant that has the details.
We're sticking with the credit card theme here for a while. We have a question from Arun who says, I've just looked at my credit card statement. I've been moved to the new KiwiBank Platinum card after they withdrew their AirPoints card. With that change came something I didn't really pay attention to until now. I now get charged an international service fee on New Zealand dollar transactions by foreign merchants. Previously, that wasn't the case. Clearly, I've agreed to this, says Arun. But the thing that's more annoying is that you don't necessarily know when purchasing online in New Zealand dollars if the transaction is going to be processed in New Zealand dollars or not. These aren't weird companies either. Common merchants like Apple, Processed in Sydney, and Amazon Prime Video, Singapore, had the fee added. I'm guessing many others weren't aware of this change. Not sure how widespread it is in the market as well. Good question, Arun. Thank you.
KiwiBank confirms that as part of changes to its debit and credit card fee structure, it's removed 12 fees, including Visa debit annual fees, overseas ATM withdrawal fees, and card replacement fees, and it's reduced the international transaction fee on debit cards from 2.5% to 1.85%, which it says aligns with credit cards. But that fee now applies to all international transactions, including New Zealand dollar payments processed offshore. It says these updates aim to rebalance fees in a way that benefits more customers while encouraging merchants to process payments locally, supporting jobs, tax contributions, and stronger consumer protections. A spokesperson for Consumer says people who've been charged an unexpected international transaction fee for a purchase in New Zealand dollars from a merchant that appears to be based in New Zealand or has a New Zealand domain name should query the fee with the bank and report it to the Commerce Commission. It says anyone making regular purchases with overseas businesses may also want to consider switching to a card that doesn't incur those fees. So I checked with a couple of other banks, and ANZ, Westpac and BNZ say they don't charge a fee if someone's making an online purchase with an overseas merchant in New Zealand dollars, but there could sometimes be a currency conversion charge if the payment's in another currency. So there you go.
All right, and another thing you've been looking at this week is what landlords are getting up to that they shouldn't be.
Yes, I did a story earlier in the week about the things that landlords are still getting in trouble for. One of the big things that people are confused about is turning up at a property. I think a lot of people think that because they own a place, they can just turn up whenever they like. And that's probably particularly true when it's near the place that they live or even next door, as is sometimes the case. But tenants do have a right to quiet enjoyment, and landlords need to give 48 hours notice for things like inspections and 24 hours notice for repairs and maintenance. If they don't, they can have exemplary damages awarded against them to a maximum of $1,500. I saw one recent case where a landlord went to a tenant's gate and shouted at them about their dodgy parking, and the tenancy tribunal sided with the tenants and said the behaviour was a breach. And other things people get wrong are that they can't require professional cleaning, including carpet cleaning. You can't say that you have to get that done. They can't charge a pet bond until next week. And they can't leave the country for more than 3 weeks, and they can't let bills like the Auckland water care bills build up into the point that the tenant ends up with a really big chunk of them in one go.
I've been stuck with a professional cleaning one before in the past. I also had one landlord turn up when we weren't there, let himself in, decide the house was too untidy, so he took the television away and left a message saying, "I'm punishing you for keeping the house too untidy. I'm keeping your television."
The tribunal would not look favourably on that behaviour, I have to say.
They threw the television at him, but yeah.
Yeah.
That was quite a while ago. Why do you think people still get stuff like this wrong?
I think there's a steady stream of cases before the tribunal that indicates that both sides still sometimes aren't getting it right. There's been a bit of a power imbalance in the rental market, and I wonder if that's why sometimes these things happen and you lose your TV. And maybe tenants have been reluctant to assert themselves, so people don't realise they're not within the rules, maybe.
Last week in our audience question, we asked what food had the biggest price increase this year. Food prices have been a big topic of conversation in the past few years, Susan. Not likely to change anytime soon.
True, food price inflation hasn't been running as hot as it was a few years ago, but it's definitely picked up again. And the problem is that even when it slows, prices aren't going backwards. So the supermarket is just an increasingly expensive place to be for more people. But the answer to our question is tomatoes. They're up 143%. Yes, tomatoes. That's quite seasonal, obviously. Prices for fruit and veg do swing around a lot. I know we talk about cheese. A kilogram of mild cheddar was $11.11 on average in January and $12.71 in October. And butter was up from $6.79 to $8.50 over the same period.
I bought 4 apples at a supermarket, which I won't name, the other week for $5.89. I was utterly shocked. Anyway, so much for being healthy. Now, our question for this week, we're back to KiwiSaver, of course. Contribution rates have been in the news lately. The national government wants to push up the contribution to 12%, 6% employee plus 6% employer contribution. It says that's in line with Australia.
Though a lot of people have pointed out that in Australia the 12% is on the employer rather than split. So our question is, what was the contribution rate when KiwiSaver started almost 20 years ago? Send your answers and any questions you might have to questions@rnz.co.nz. Keep them coming in, we want them all. Bye for now.
No Stupid Questions with Susan Edmonds was written and presented by Susan Edmonds. Justin Gregory is the producer, the engineer is Bill Benj. Thanks to Sarah, Rosemary, River and Arun for the questions, and consumer Claire Matthews, KiwiBank, Mary-Jo Vergara, that's me, and Barry Coates for their answers. Follow and listen to No Stupid Questions with Susan Edmonds on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any podcast app so you don't miss an episode.